you for coming today. To begin with, feel free to present yourselves in the chat and indicate where you're calling in from, perhaps by indicating which Indigenous territory you're calling from today. My name is Wade Thorhog, and I am one of the executive directors at Food Secure Canada. And I have the extreme pleasure of moderating the webinar today. D'abord, j'aimerais vous avertir que cette présentation sera interprétée, donc pour ceux désirant de l'écouter en français, vous pouvez appuyer sur le bouton en bas sous la forme de globe et ensuite cliquer sur français. Attendees are muted throughout the duration of the webinar, but if you want to add comments, you can do so in the chat. If you are having technical issues, please identify them in the chat and we will be happy to help. N'hésitez pas à poser vos questions et commentaires en français si vous en désirez. Je peux toujours les traduire pour nos panélistes. Note that this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be available on our website at a later date. We'd like to acknowledge that the work of Food Secure Canada is carried out on Indigenous land. FSC is based in Tiohtià:ke on Kanien'kehá:ka territory, which is where I am calling in from today. FSC is in a continuous process of learning and unlearning in order to decolonize our practices and center the voices of those historically marginalized from our food systems, particularly those of the original Indigenous peoples. So today we have 4 panelists that will be presenting, and our purpose in hosting this webinar is to understand how solidarity grocery stores and co-ops help advance food sovereignty, how they are more transparent and fairly priced alternatives to the multinationals that dominate the markets, and to highlight successful models that can be replicated or scaled up in different regions. So we have these presenters who are generally offering their time and expertise. I will present each individually before their presentation. So to start with, we will hear from John Steinman, who is the author of Grocery Story, The Promise of Food Co-ops in the Age of Grocery Giants. And I have my paper copy here. Maybe after theirs, I can get you to e-autograph it. And he also served as director and later president of the Kootenay Co-op in BC, Canada's largest retail food co-op specializing in natural foods. John has visited over 175 food co-ops, including dozens in development, and I was told that he was even at visiting one just yesterday. So without further ado, John, would you like to begin presenting?
Absolutely, and yeah, thank you for the introduction. And I do live in Nelson, British Columbia, which is the traditional territory of the Sinixt, the Ktunaxa, and the Syilx. I happen to presently be here in Toronto, and I'm just going to share my screen. Let me know that's popping up okay. Great, so this is not a life-size version of my book. This is a small shopping cart that my book is now residing in this image. This is a book I wrote in 2019 called Grocery Story, The Promise of Food Co-ops in the Age of Grocery Giants, and it was the product of many, many years of working full-time as a food systems journalist through my work on the radio series Deconstructing Dinner and the television series of the same name. And the passion that I have for this topic of alternatives to corporate supermarkets is somewhat communicated through this photo, because after my book came out, I decided I was so passionate about this topic that I wanted to tour this idea around both the US and Canada. And through the support of many organizations, I was able to purchase a van and travel for 6 months to 125 food co-ops across the US and Canada. And part of, what I think this communicates is that there's something about community-owned grocery stores that I think is dramatically important. And this is in front of the Kootenay Co-op, of which I've been an co-owner of for almost 20 years now. And I was a board director there for 10 years. And part of what I came to recognize through my interest in the food system and eventually in grocery stores was starting to understand the food system as a series of bottlenecks. And this was an image that Greenpeace put out some years ago that I think really helps us to imagine just what the power of retailers and grocery stores are, when generally there are only a handful, which is what's represented there in that bottleneck of the number 5, only a handful of companies controlling the flow of goods, determining which foods make it to market and which don't. And so grocery stores really do have this power to influence everything that's happening upstream and thereby determining the future of food. And so that power, I encourage folks to really extend into their experience walking into a grocery store like these ones here, that these are not just buildings selling food. These are powerful institutions that do determine the future of the food system. They shape human health. They shape the planet. They are more than just a business selling us food. And as I refer to in my book, they're very much the food system's control center, really determining like I say, which foods make it to market and which don't. And so this has become something that over the past few years now has become quite recognized as a new level of interest to begin to explore, particularly through Canada's Competition Bureau, which last year came out with the report, Canada needs more grocery competition. And it's for this reason, recognizing just the power of these retailers. One of those recommendations is to support more independent grocers and support existing independent grocers and the growth of those independent grocers. And I want to share just a story here of an independent grocer. This was the first natural foods chain in Western Canada that opened in the 1980s, called Capers Markets. It had very strong intentions to support a stronger food system, community, support workers, support suppliers, support the local regional area there in the lower mainland of British Columbia. And they eventually had 3 locations up until the early 90s. But behind this model is private ownership. And because it was privately owned, it was susceptible to the possibility of being acquired or the owners selling that retailer. Sure enough, the founders sold this chain of 3 stores to Alfalfa's out of Colorado. And then Alfalfa's was purchased by Wild Oats. And then Wild Oats was purchased by Whole Foods, and Whole Foods, as we now know, is owned by Amazon. So the founders of this very well-intentioned business, I don't think ever would have imagined that this well-intentioned grocer would become owned by one of the most powerful companies on the planet. And this is what those Capers markets in Vancouver look like today. And so with those transitions also came the impact on their suppliers, who no longer were dealing with a local company, local people who cared about the local region. They were now dealing with regional offices or head offices and people who did not necessarily live in Vancouver. This, of course, also affects workplaces and the workers, the staff. And this is not just happening in Vancouver. This has happened to Longo's. This has happened to Choices Markets, Nature's Fair, Farm Boy. These were all independent businesses who once became successful, became very attractive to acquisition, and sure enough, are now owned by some of the largest grocers in the country. So I share this because this is what makes me so passionate about the cooperative model, is I've come to understand it as being the most durable model of grocery store ownership and governance. Never before has a food co-op been purchased by a private entity. And one of the reasons for that is that food co-ops are owned by their thousands of customers. So I am one of 17,000 owners of my Kootenay co-op in Nelson, British Columbia. And one of the reasons for that never having happened is because in order for a food co-op to be sold, it would have to be a vote by its thousands of owners. And never before have owners come together to vote to sell their co-op to a private interest. This here on the right is a photo from a co-op in Minneapolis that had 17 people running for their board of directors the year I was there in 2019. So when we see headlines like this, that independent grocers are a dying breed, the co-op model is a way for us to protect the independent grocer, particularly as they become successful and become more attractive to acquisition. And I want to also introduce the idea of accountability, because I'm mentioning the power of these grocers to determine the future of food, human health, the planet. Who is holding these grocers accountable to the influence they do have in those areas of economic influence and environmental influence and human health influence? And there is no public agency holding these grocers accountable in those areas. And so accountability is also something that is built in to this democratic model that is the cooperative model. There's also the piece around transparency on profits. And this is part of what makes me, as a customer and member owner of my grocery store, much more trustworthy of my grocer, because food co-ops can't profit off of their customers. The profits that are generated at a food co-op, which many do generate, are returned back into the business. And this co-op here in Vermont has a great image that helps to describe that the profits generated by this grocery store get either reinvested back into the store or returned to owners through a patronage return. This isn't a return that you can expect to retire on. I received maybe about $9 in store credit this year as my return as a percentage of profits, but it really does communicate that this is a grocery store that is working on behalf of its community and the people who shop at the store. Cooperatives democratize the economy. This is another way to really understand the power of co-ops is we take the principles of democracy and embed them into the businesses and services that we rely on. And some examples of that, just as reminders, it's often easy to forget that credit unions are financial cooperatives. So this is a financial institution that I'm an owner of in Nelson. And so we take with the co-op model, some of the most important institutions that we engage with, like banking or transportation. This is another co-op I'm a part of, a car share co-op with 25 vehicles in Nelson, out front of our Kootenay co-op grocery store. So we're taking transportation, financial institutions, media, like our co-op community radio station, and of course, food, which is the topic of this webinar. So co-ops have this power to really democratize all of these areas of our lives that are so valuable. These two quotes are my favorite from two Canadian co-op leaders. Brett Fairbairn writes, each co-op is a microcosm of what's happening to communities and each offers insights into community response to challenge. Cooperatives are the radical center, whereas capitalism and communism have a history of consolidating power into fewer and fewer hands. Cooperatives spread power around. So I want to quickly just share the story of my co-op because this was the story that really inspired my interest in this model, my interest in writing a book. This was our co-op in 2016. It dates back to 1975, began as a buying club, and eventually moved into a storefront in the 1980s. When I got there in 2006, we were doing $6 million in sales, but we were competing with companies like Loblaw, who has the Wholesale Club, or the Jim Pattison Group, which has Save On Foods, and Sobeys, which owns Safeway. These are the three big competitors in Nelson. There was also this other store owned by Loblaw, Extra Foods, but they didn't own the building. And so our co-op, which was becoming more and more successful, we grew to $14 million in sales in that location. We needed a place to grow. And because our community has gotten so behind our co-op, we were able to acquire this building when Loblaw's lease expired because the owners of the building were local. And we became a developer of a mixed-use development. And this was really the power of local food and community-oriented grocery store, a grocery store model to be able to put up what was the first construction crane in Nelson's history. And this is what our store looks like today. So we've become one of the top 4 grocers in the city, one of the top 3 in the city. We employ 150 people, about $5.5 million in wages. And I should add that here I am talking about this is what we are doing, but I'm no longer on the board. I don't work at the co-op. I'm just one of 17,000 owners, but speaking of this grocery store as if it is mine because I am a co-owner in it. This is our produce department. Many co-ops have gathering spaces, so it's more than just a store to come in and be transactional in your relationship. It's a place to come and gather and connect. We also were able to, with that growth, put in a meat department, which now supports many local farmers in the region, particularly in the Creston Valley. We've generated our own labeling systems so that the transparency of what the food is and the origin of that food is stewarded by our co-op itself. All of what you see here is prepared in-house, so we're vertically integrating into food processing as well. It's not just about buying product, it's also about processing product within the store and maintaining more of that food dollar in the community. And as a co-op, we're really tracking how we impact the local environment and the local economy and communicate that to our owners once a year. People always ask, well, how affordable is this store? And our co-op does focus in our case on natural, organic, and local foods, but we sell products that you see in every major grocer. And on this day here, you can see this special here, 2 for $7. On that same day, I walked into every other grocer, and these were the prices at Save On Foods, owned by Jim Pattison, the Sobeys Safeway, and the Loblaw Wholesale Club. And part of that piece around price is also, I think, a bit of a psychological perception, because when I walk into the Loblaw-owned Wholesale Club, I see pricing like this and displays like this. And that isn't a sale price. That's actually a price that is the regular price that these are usually priced at. And so there is also this perception that maybe these larger companies are able to offer products at cheaper prices. And of course, that can sometimes be the case, but not always. And what I did some years ago is I walked in and did a direct comparison of every product I could find that was identical, both at our co-op as well as at the wholesale club. And we are highly competitive as a single independent store with Canada's largest grocer, who has 30% of the market. As a grocer, we are not only selling food, but we give back to our community. These are about 100 organizations that receive some level of support from our organization and our co-op every year. One of those would be the Kootenay Organic Grower Society, who, as long as I've been a member, every year there's a day dedicated to them where 3% of sales on that day goes towards that organization. So it's important to recognize that food co-ops are more than grocery stores. We incubate small food-based businesses. We help support growing the co-op sector. Generally, all the co-ops that I engage with, particularly in the US, are working towards going beyond a living wage into thriving wages for staff. And we generate community value as well. People often look for a food co-op when they're choosing where to live. And so this means that our grocers as a co-op are more resilient because we're more than just a store selling food. So when Stop and Shop in the US announced just recently that they're going to be closing underperforming stores, as a co-op, you can generally anticipate that if the co-op is underperforming, that doesn't mean the end of the store. It often means that the co-op just needs to get better at what it's doing rather than just close the store. And this is what I get to see. I'm just looking at my time check here. We're at 2 minutes, is it? Okay, I'm just going to fast track through some of these last slides here. I just want to paint the picture of co-ops in Canada. Co-ops in Canada date back to the early 20th century. This here is the early Calgary Co-op in the 1950s and the Red River Co-op in Manitoba. This is what the Calgary Co-op looks like today with 23 retail locations throughout the city. Many of the co-ops in Western Canada are part of Federated Co-op. These are all Federated Co-op locations, convenience stores, gas stations, all owned by their customers. This is the Red River Co-op in Winnipeg, one of their new locations. There's the Arctic Co-ops network. There is also images here of some of those Arctic co-ops. This one here on the left, a new one opening up in northern Saskatchewan, the network in northern Quebec, in Nunavik. And there's also this federation of co-ops throughout Quebec and the Maritime provinces. And then there's many of the stores in Eastern Canada that used to be part of Co-op Atlantic that do co-brand with some of the dominant grocers like IGA and Foodland. And distribution, there is also cooperative distribution that remains here in this country, and Federated Co-op is perhaps the best example, a distributor owned by independent cooperative retailers. And lastly, I'll just share in the United States, there are 325 food co-op locations across the US. These are all quite similar to my co-op or the Karma Co-op in Toronto. And I encourage you to go onto my website, grocerystory.coop, where you can see images of co-ops all across the country. And it really does help to, I think, start to encourage people to dream about what a food co-op might look like in your community. And so with that, I'll leave it there. I want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of this webinar. As you might be able to tell, there's a lot I have to say about food co-ops, which is why I wrote a book about them. So thank you. I look forward to hearing from the other panelists.
Thank you so much, John. Yeah, what you were saying earlier about private independent grocers made me think of my experience when I was a teenager. I had a summer job at an IGA in Calgary, and there was a lot of pride among the staff that they weren't, that they were still an independent grocer, working at an independent grocer, despite the fact that Safeway was encroaching in neighboring areas. But last I heard that IGA was subsumed by Sobeys, so it was just another branch of that. So that's again a reminder that despite the fact that it's an independent private grocer, there are market incentives that cause them to be consolidated.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So we will, and I also wanted to remind the attendees that if you do have a question that comes up during the presentations, feel free to enter them into the Q&A section, and we will be collecting those questions and posing them at the end after every panelist is presented. So next, I will present Beccah Fraisier. and she became a co-director at Carrefour Solidaire Community Food Center in 2020, where she supports the Trois Paniers alternative grocery store and the Marché Solidaire Frontenac. And they're both wonderful locations located in Sud-West of Montreal. And I've been to them, and I invite anybody who's in the area to check them out as well. But yeah, with that, take it away, Beccah.
Thanks, Ray. Hi, everyone. Bonjour. I'm going to present in English, but I work in French, so you'll have to excuse me if I forget some words. It happens to me sometimes. I am one of 3 executive co-directors at Carrefour Solidaire Community Food Center in Tchachagé, Montreal, in the Centre Sud neighborhood. So if you know Montreal, we're just under the Jacques Cartier Bridge on the Montreal side. And today, I think I'm the only one who's not talking to you about co-ops, but I'm very curious to learn more about co-ops myself. But I'm going to talk to you about 2 social economy projects that are run by my nonprofit organization. And one of them is Marché Solidaire Frontenac, which is a seasonal public market. And the other one is Trois Paniers, which is an alternative grocery store that runs year round. And yeah, so we can go to the next slide. Before I jump into the 2 projects, I want to tell you a little bit about what a community food center is, because I think it's important to understand what comes next. Our community food center is actually composed of 2 legal entities. So on the one side, we're a charitable organization, so charity, registered charity, that runs all kinds of social programs related to food, including community meals, cooking workshops, gardening workshops, and also a large regional food coupon program that I'll talk more about at the end of my presentation. On the other side, we are a social economy nonprofit organization that runs 2 projects, the market and the grocery store. And I think it's important to understand this because the fact that these 2 projects are embedded within our community food center means that our relationship with our community members is very deep, and we have a lot of access to understanding our community members' lived experience and to hearing from them. And so all of our programs, including the grocery store and the market, their development has been informed by deep consultation with the community and a deep understanding of our neighborhood specifically. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start off by telling you about the older of the 2 projects. So the Marché Solidaire Frontenac has been running since 2007, and it's located at the entrance to a subway station, the Frontenac metro station, in a pretty downtown east in Montreal. And the main mission of the Marché was, when it was started, to promote local products and also be an additional point of sale for local producers to bring their products to market. We are open 6 days a week from May to October, and we're a member of Montreal Public Markets alongside the major public markets like Jean Talon and Atwater here in Montreal. But as you'll see, we are a bit particular in that we're considered a solidarity market, or we consider ourselves a solidarity market. The next slide, please. So here's a little glimpse of our market installations. The building with the blue trim is the entrance to the subway station. And I feel like I love this picture because I think it really situates us within our neighborhood. So in the background there, you can see a high-rise building with green balconies, and that is a nonprofit housing development with a lot of subsidized housing in it. A lot of seniors live there, and also a lot of folks with reduced mobility. Our neighborhood is traditionally a very active manufacturing neighborhood with the Molson Brewery, if you can think of that sort of iconic site when you drive into Montreal. Or there's also still an active tobacco factory in our neighborhood with JT McDonald. So a lot of the longtime residents of the neighborhood were either worked in those factories or are the children of folks who worked in those factories. So not a lot of opportunities for wealth accumulation over the course of their lives. So there are quite a few isolated seniors and folks without a lot of wealth in our community. And then to the left there, you can see a new development going up. And that is one of many developments, sort of gentrifying forces within our community. Housing is still relatively affordable in our community, so there also are a lot of new young families, a lot of recently arrived immigrants in our neighborhood who are taking advantage of relatively affordable rent in the neighborhood compared to other neighborhoods. But then we have these new developments that are bringing wealthier families into our neighborhood. All this to say that we have a super diverse mix of folks around us, both in terms of cultures, life experiences, and budgets when you're talking about coming to the market. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the market really was started with a mission of promoting local products. So you can see our prides and joy of our local strawberries, which are in season right now. We sell a lot of strawberries and a lot of berries at the market. But our market has many objectives, and here are a few of them, including affordability. I think offering prices that are both, sorry, everyone. There we go. Offering prices that are fair to producers was really important to is really important to our market, but also making sure that they're as accessible as possible for our very diverse customer base. In our neighborhood, there's very few produce stores, which are like fruiteries, as they're called in Montreal. In other neighborhoods in Montreal, there's quite a few like produce stores. We just don't have that in our neighborhood. And the only major supermarket within our immediate neighborhood is an IGA that has consistently been rated the most expensive grocery store on the island of Montreal. So not a lot of access to fresh produce in our neighborhood, and affordability has always been really important to the folks in our community that we've consulted as we've developed these projects. The market also aims to be participatory, both in terms of this consultation, this dialogue with community members when we're developing the program, as well as by inviting community members to come in and volunteer and participate a little bit in the daily operation of the market. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Next slide, please. Just a couple more visuals of our displays. As you can see on the right here, we're kind of located at a busy intersection at the Ontario and Frontenac. There's multiple bus stops on this intersection and a lot of car, foot, bike traffic. So we kind of have two sorts of main customers. One are commuters, who are like grabbing some strawberries while they're on their way from point A to point B. And then we also have another significant proportion of customers that are very hyper-local, live right here in this dense housing surrounding us and wait for the market to open every season. So it's really important to us to pay attention to both. Next slide, please. So in thinking about accessibility and participation at the market, we came up with this kind of complicated looking system, but it's not that complicated. But it's basically about offering discounts at the cash register depending on a couple criteria. So one of the top tier here is about your membership status. So everybody who comes to market is encouraged to become a member. Becoming a member of the organization is free. And when you register, you get asked a question about your food security status, which is about whether you have a sufficient or necessary budget to purchase food in sufficient quality and quantity for your household. There's a couple options of answers. If you answer anything other than yes, all the time, I have the budget that I need, you are offered a 10% discount automatically at the cash register because you're deemed to be food insecure to some degree. If you're food secure, you do not get a discount at the cash. Pay the ticketed price or the labeled price. That's the top tier. The bottom tier is if you're an active volunteer at the market, then you're eligible for another 10% discount, and those are stackable. So if you're food insecure and you volunteer, you get a 20% discount. So this is a really interesting system that we came up with that works pretty well. But the grocery store that I'm about to talk to you about has a completely different solidarity pricing model, and I will come back to that in a minute. So you can see kind of the evolution of this idea of solidarity pricing as we got more and more interested in removing barriers to food access for food insecure people. This slide, I just wanted to show you a couple extra stats about the market. We process about 15,000 transactions per season, about 100 a day. And last season, we sold about $200,000 worth of produce and other stuff. We have not just produce, but also dairy, bread, meat, the basics, and all local food. Bestsellers are berries, as I mentioned, and I like this quote. It's a pretty representative quote in my mind from a local resident of our neighborhood who talks about the very limited access to fresh produce in Centre Sud. Next slide, please. So despite being beloved by our neighborhood residents, the market doesn't help much in the winter. So come the end of October, the market closes. What do folks do? They have to go back to the IGA, right? Or leave the neighborhood to find groceries. So in January 2022, so about 2.5 years ago, after hearing multiple rounds of consultations from community members over multiple years that there was a really sort of dire need in the community for accessible groceries year-round, we opened Trois Paniers. The tagline here doesn't translate as well in English. In French, it rhymes, which is nice, which it doesn't do in English, despite my best efforts. Maybe our interpreter, Juliette, can help me with that. So the gist of it is there, though, that to each their own price, to each their own taste, à chacun son coût, à chacun leur goût in French. Trois paniers means 3 baskets. So this is because every item on the shelf has 3 prices. So you get to the cash and you get shown 3 totals. You get to choose which tier of pricing you want to pay based on your situation. I will talk more about that in a bit, but just want to give you the rest of the backgrounder on the grocery store. It's open 6 days a week as well, year-round. Everyone is welcome to shop at Trois Paniers. I do my groceries there. It's located inside of our community food center on St. Catherine Street East. And in fact, as you'll see in the next slide, please, it actually shares space with our dining room where community meals are served. So if you look carefully, it's a super small space, and every sort of surface and square inch, I'm not exaggerating, is used in a couple different ways. So these big tables that you see with the boxes on them, right now it's in grocery store mode. They're used as display for products in the grocery store. But on Tuesdays and Thursdays, they get stacked up, put on rolling platforms, rolled into the corners, and those tables become seating in the dining room for community meals. You can see the little stool chairs underneath that flip out, and you can sit there to eat your meal. Next slide, please. This is a view towards the back of the space. In the back is a production kitchen. And I just wanted to point out a few things in this picture. So an example of the importance of community consultation for us is this spice rack in the square in the middle of the picture, which is actually a seed rack that was repurposed as a spice rack. So when we did community consultations, one thing people said is, it's not a grocery store if you don't have spices. And we were like, spices? We hadn't thought about that. And so I think it was really important and interesting to, get those, have that. That's just a small example, but just the importance of speaking to the community members and making sure their vision is represented in the project that you create. We also have a very active suggestion box. Sorry, can you just go back 1 second? We also have a suggestion box, and we do annual surveys of our customers over a couple of weeks to make sure that we're getting feedback and developing the grocery store continuously along community needs. This grocery store has a very different primary mission from the market. We do have local foods. We have some organic stuff too, some beautiful stuff on the shelves. Really, the primary mission of this grocery store was accessibility, along with the creation of what we call chaîne de solidarité, or what is very hard to translate in English, but I often translate it as facilitating mutual support among different kinds of customers, among community members, basically. So if we go to the next slide now, I will explain the pricing system. So basically, you can pay more or less depending on your situation, depending on your means. So everybody's welcome to come, everybody shops, but you have a different role to play depending on your situation and your budget. So these are the 3 prices. The lowest price is a solidarity price. The solidarity price is a subsidized price. It's often the at-cost price we pay to the distributor, but we have the ability to subsidize it more or less within like a 10% range on either side. And we actually determine prices individually by product by product for everything on our shelves. We do a once a year comparison with other grocery stores to see how competitive we are in terms of our supplier price. And we decide based on that whether we're going to offer the at-cost price for the Solidarity price or a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on how important the product is, what it's selling for elsewhere, how good of a price we got, all the rest. But the idea is to keep this price as accessible as possible without risking the well-being of, or the resilience of our grocery store. This middle price is the suggested price. It includes a 30 to 35% margin, which is fairly standard for a social economy project like ours. And it keeps the lights on and the cashiers paid. And then the pay it forward price is the highest one. And that's a higher margin, like a more of a 40 to 45% margin. And it directly subsidizes the lowest price. So it enables us to take that risk and offer that subsidized price. The split of the percentages, people always ask who pays what, what proportion of people choose which price. There's no means testing. It's really people, actually our cash register includes a touch screen. So people literally poke price they want to pay at the cash register, which is super great for dignity reasons. It's very subtle and not very visible. The cashier actually flips the screen out, you poke, they flip it back, and they plug the total into whatever payment method you're using. So the split in year one of the grocery store was about 25 on either side. 25% of people chose the lowest or the highest price, and 50% down the middle. So it's pretty good balance. But it obviously varies from month to month and year to year, depending on all sorts of things. We see the impact of inflation, where people that were paying the suggested price go down to the Solidarity price, or vice versa. And we see other effects of, our own outreach, even in terms of who we're reaching in terms of customers. There's an article in the paper, and all of a sudden we get a bunch of sort of tourist shoppers that come in and pay the pay it forward price, which helps our bottom line. So I can talk more about that in the questions if you guys are curious. Next slide, please. This is just a little bit more visuals. I wanted to show you our little bulk section, which we're excited about. And we also make our own granola in-house. I mentioned we have a production kitchen in the back, which actually takes all of the produce and stuff that's about to go bad or that isn't good enough to sell anymore, and transforms it into salads, soups, and meals that go back on the shelves, or it feeds into community meals. So it's a really kind of very low waste to zero waste. I always hesitate to say zero waste, but low waste anyway, sort of system, which is really exciting and awesome. And I love this quote because I think it's really interesting to think about the effect of your decisions for what you put on the shelves and how that affects community members. So this is somebody that basically changed a little bit how they're eating or what they're eating based on what they found within the grocery store. And this is something we joke a lot about within our team. We have like the trois paniers snack would be like cheese curds and a certain brand of crackers that we offer. So it's just a reminder that people are really impacted actually by what's available on the shelves. And I just wanted to show you our facade there, our bright yellow facade, which makes us really easy to pick out. A couple stats. This picture here is the in-house stuff that our kitchen makes. So the soups, the salads, the meals, all looks very appetizing to me. And they're very popular. I think it's probably our most, people get very excited about the meals. They never last more than a couple hours on the shelves, and we actually have trouble keeping enough of them on the shelves at the moment. In 2023, 2024, we processed about over 28,000 transactions, about over $500,000 in sales. And we have 34 active suppliers. So we started with the suppliers from the market that we already had established relationships with, and we built out from there because we wanted to offer more different products, a wider variety of products on the shelves than at the market. And this quote, I also just think is representative of a certain type of person that comes to our space, who's a full-time student, doesn't have much income, and they still find that they can buy a high quality of products at our store, which is very nice to hear. Next slide, please. So last sort of piece here, the Solidarity pricing model. So you can see sort of the evolution from the market to the grocery store of the Solidarity pricing model, but even that, Solidarity price is all well and good. It doesn't, is reduced by 30% or more, you know, that price, and it's often very like cheaper than you would find it pretty much any other grocery store. But sometimes it's just not enough, right? Like sometimes people just don't have the purchasing power to even be able to afford that lowest subsidized price. So for me, I wanted to talk about Carte Proximité, which is our food coupon program that we actually run regionally, not just in our neighborhood, but at the scale of the island of Montreal and Laval. So this program runs across 11 boroughs in Montreal and the city of Laval. And what it is a food coupon program where families that are living in food insecurity get a plastic card that you can see in this picture that's recharged every month with a monthly allowance, depending on their family size. We've built a network of 39 organizations that distribute these cards to their members or to families that are food insecure in their neighborhoods. And we've built a network of 57 markets and kiosks that accept this card as a method of payment. So it's really a dual objective to improve food access for food insecure families, but it's also to encourage local food sourcing. So all markets that participate in this program set objectives around local food sourcing to improve their local food sourcing basically year to year. But as a Carte Proximité card holder, you can buy anything on the shelf. So it's not your responsibility, it's the market's responsibility to set those goals and work on local food sourcing. And how this interacts with the grocery store solidarity pricing model is that because these cards are fully subsidized, we ask everybody to choose using these cards to pay the suggested price, which is important to think about because this program is run by our charitable legal entity. It's fully subsidized, and it doesn't impact the financial well-being of our grocery store, right? When people pick the subsidized price, the grocery store has to absorb that. But when people come in with a Carte Proximité, they have this purchasing power, and it doesn't come at the cost of the financial viability of our grocery store because they're able to pay the suggested price, which includes that margin to keep the grocery store running. So we started this program because, you know, food stamps exist in the States. SNAP is a very established program, but in Canada, we haven't really tested this approach on anything like an interesting scale. So we really wanted to test this approach in Quebec and show some data on why it might be an interesting approach, and also update the model for the 21st century, not use paper coupons, provide a dignified alternative to food assistance that basically mainstreams people, that invites folks living in food insecurity to have the same access to the same products as everybody else, right? So they're shopping at the same markets and grocery stores and buying the same beautiful products that we all have access to, or that folks with a larger budget have access to. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick map of those different locations that accept Carte Proximité as a mode of payment, just to show you kind of the spread of the markets across Montreal. And a quick quote that I just wanted to share with you of somebody who's talking about having a chronic illness and how that means that traditional food assistance, like a food bank, doesn't respond to their needs because they really need to access fresh food for their health. And so this kind of program, in addition to the benefits of mainstreaming people for dignity and well-being, is also really potentially able to impact people's health, both psychological and physical health. And I think that's all I had to say. Here's my email address. If you want to reach out, don't hesitate. If you're in town, come visit. And thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Beccah. I realized at the beginning that I said that this was in the Sud-West when it's actually in the Centre-Sud. That's really embarrassing for somebody who claims to be a Montrealer. But and then the translation that you had for à chacun ses goûts has generated some ideas in the chat, and I actually thought of one myself, but then I was kind of dismayed to see that the other two that came up were way better than mine. But mine is to each their own savings, to each their own cravings, and we also have the cost of your cart is up to your heart, as well as pay what you wish for your ideal grocery list. Right on. Okay, so next we are going to hear from Paul, Paul Decampo is the director of the Karma Co-op in Toronto, where he's been a member since 1997. Through his work advocating for local agricultural products, he has been involved with the International Slow Food Movement, as well as Food Share Toronto's Fresh Produce Distribution Network. Paul, would you please?
Well, hello, everyone. Really happy to join you today. And I'm realizing that my presentation is not very image rich. So I highly encourage you to visit our website, where there are some great images of the store and what we do together there. The next slide, please. I'm just going to review a little bit about where we are as a kind of mature co-op, and in a much different context, and really, I would say in some ways less successful than the example that we saw from Kootenay, and perhaps contextualize that to some extent, and how we're moving forward. So we have been around since 1972. We're kind of in the Midtown West Side in Toronto. So what was more of a working class area, but has been gentrified and has become more of an affluent area. The original members kind of came out of the University of Toronto and the Quakers community. Many of our AGMs were held at the Friends House, which is just around the corner from us. We purchased a building in 1979, which is on an alleyway, now Carmel Lane, which in some ways has been our rock and has allowed us to survive, and in some ways been a constraint, because there's really no opportunity to prepare fresh food there. And doesn't have great street presence. So while it's been beneficial to us, we do sometimes dream about another location as well. And over time, we relied less on member labor and more on paid labor. And then that's developed into the workers organizing as a QP bargaining unit in 2011, which has been very positive for our cooperative. It's really professionalized and stabilized the workforce, and of course allowed us to live up to our values of providing higher quality employment to those workers. Next, please. So what are our mission statement out of the gates? To create a community of actively participating members, not to be passive receptors of what the food system was providing in 1972, to foster that healthy connection to the food we eat, the people who grow it, and other organizations who share our beliefs. From the beginning, we started as a buying club as well. If one wanted to buy brown rice in 1972, you need to get together with your friends and split a bag of brown rice, which is kind of the inspiration behind this. But then we also worked with those early organic farmers. Alvin Filsinger is one of those. One of the original organic farmers in Ontario, who was farming organically from the 50s and used to ship apples and apple juice as far as California in the early development of organic agriculture. And at one time, we would like to collaborate more with other food cooperative producers, although there's just not a lot of those to select from. And even our major food distribution company, the Ontario Natural Food Co-op, unfortunately has been purchased by a larger firm and is just a for-profit company. So that's one of the wishes we have for further development. I think environmental issues and where they intersect with food was really how people got interested in the co-op and came together to create a community resource for food in the neighborhood. And a lot of that was around organic agriculture. And I think we've also developed a greater interest in the community in reducing packaging waste and food waste. And so our bulk program has really developed. And I think, I like the idea of the trois paniers, and what's particular about how one eats from that source. And I think at Karma, it really is about dried beans, whole grains, and fresh produce, and how we build our menus around those. And then in order to exercise political and economic control over our food, we need to be viable. And that viability has been a struggle for us. And maintaining profitability in order to support growth has been one of our challenges. Next, please. And what are those challenges? Well, number one, we're not in a food, well, the products that are unique to Karma are no longer unique. Many organic products, many whole grains, those things are available at the local grocery stores. And we're the opposite of a food desert. We are surrounded by both independent and chain grocers, and that is only growing. You know, a farm boy, which to the uninformed looks like an independent grocer, although we know is owned by Sobe, has opened up close to us as well. And we're also served by a great independent grocery store, Fiesta Farms. So that's a little bit of a different context for us where we are. You know, about 10 years ago, as we're recognizing the aging membership and how the changing cultural demographics of the neighborhood meant two things. One, we had to welcome newer members, and we had to expand our range of offerings in order to suit that broader range of cultural identities and our food identities in our neighborhood. But it's difficult for younger potential members. The Toronto real estate market is very tight. The housing costs are very high, and getting people to prioritize spending on high quality food has been difficult. And of course, among those younger people, work is more precarious, and having time to engage in member labor has proved difficult for them as well. Of course, these result in growing food insecurity and food price sensitivity. You know, I believe that food prices sometimes bear an inordinate amount of attention around food insecurity, where really it's not distributing the benefits of the economy fairly across the population is a bigger factor to me than food prices themselves. And you know, more broadly, and especially accelerated over COVID, to trend towards online sales, which then puts us up competing against Amazon and Whole Foods, the world's largest retailer and the largest purveyor of natural foods. And the growth of true farmers markets has been nothing but a positive for our city generally, but it's proved a challenge for Karma, because it's given people other ways of connecting with local farmers outside of the cooperative. And that's been a positive, but that's part of our context here. Next, please. So recently, you know, our profitability has been marginal. We have had many small deficits, yearly deficits over time. 2020, the first phase of COVID was positive. People were shopping in one place. Memberships increased. People were shopping more at the co-op. We had high safety standards within the store, which many people appreciated. And so we were staying in the black through that period. But then we did go through some membership declines in 2020. You know, many people left Toronto because of housing costs and because of lifestyle changes and the ability to work from home and choosing a less expensive home to work from. The shift to online shopping certainly affected this. And we had always had a continuous recruitment process, and those opportunities declined over COVID. We also had less member labor in the store, which increased some of our costs and led to us running some deficits from 2021 to the current fiscal year, which just ended. And there were membership declines, and we'll look quickly at some data on that. But then from the fall of 2022, we engaged in more outreach and reversed that trend. And then we restructured our membership in 2023, and we'll look at that next. So historically, we've always had a yearly fee, and that was been $50. And then, and I'm just going to go down the old structure first. There was an optional $100 loan. And then if someone advanced the $100 loan, they would get a 5% discount on that membership fee. And then we had, originally, everyone, there was work obligation for everyone, unless one had a medical reason not to engage in member labor. And then we kind of developed this complex scaffolding that either you could pay $25 a month to buy back your hours, or you'd pay a 10% surcharge at cash. And all of this meant that explaining our membership structure to new members was kind of complicated. And also, as I've said before, the labor requirement became onerous for many people, especially younger families. So under the new structure, we've introduced a $20 a year fund for students, and we do extend that also to those who let us know about food insecurity. I like the model that I was just seeing, and it's something I could see us adapting. And now member labor is not required, although if one does keep up their 2-hour a month requirement, then there is a 5% discount. But that has required us to increase our margins because we gave up some revenue on the membership side. So we did have to increase our margins in a competitive marketplace, which is proved to be a challenge as well. Next, please. So you can just see the data on our membership, which had been declining, which had risen at the beginning of COVID, kind of meandered and declined. And then when we engaged in our campaigns in 2022, we saw some increases, but a little bit of decline after that as well. But in May of this past year, we had 574, which was the highest that we've had. Next, please. So currently, in April of this year, the general manager again put out a call to action and a warning that we needed to return to profitability in order to maintain the cooperative. We had an all hands on deck meeting in May. And then the Loblaws boycott has been well timed for us, and that it's given many people motivation to think about their grocery options and to look beyond the chain stores, and to think about cooperatives. And then the Canadian Press story that was released at the beginning of May was beneficial, that it talked about co-ops as an alternative generally and kind of centered karma in that store. So that gained us some good earned media. CTV News came out, CBC Radio reached out to us. We were able to kind of get our word out again in our neighborhood. And we've been going out to farmers markets to engage into direct appeals to people, because we feel that what we offer as a cooperative is very complementary to shopping at farmers markets. We've seen the decline in the new memberships reversed, and our new high was 588 active member households. So, when I look at that number and I hear about Kootenay, it shows that we have a lot of potential still. We have added 50 new members since this new campaign, and we have 166 trial shoppers on the go right now. So that's been very positive for us. We're trying to do some outreach and get beyond and talk about food issues. I think if we're going to talk about price, we also need to think about the value of food and the values embodied in the food. And so one of those was to shine a light on the migrant workers who produce so much of our local food in Ontario, and to think about how they are treated and how paying them fair wages and good living conditions have an impact on price, and whether we should, and the need for us to pay the true price of food in order to meet those values. So that was a successful event. You can see the participants there. Next, please. Happy to see Anika on the in the comments. I met with her recently from Black Urbanism Toronto, and we're kind of trying to build a network. You know, Toronto needs a dozen food co-ops. Not just one kind of teetering along, and we want to be inspire that broader movement as well. And they have a really inspiring project in Little Jamaica, and we're hoping to be a resource for them as they develop that. Next, please. So, to me, beyond food, the power of the cooperative is getting people out of their homes and meeting each other and uniting in a common mission, and going back to our mission statement, to be active participants, to join together into making a difference in this food, in the food system. And I think, you know, community action is important, and resisting social isolation, which to me, beyond food, is one of our most pressing issues. We need to be a center for that positive and hopeful and collective action. And there are many ways for members to contribute. Next, please. And, you know, we encourage people to shop at Karma, and one method that we're doing to do so is what we call by the bushel, kind of collective pre-orders in order to direct more of our dollars to Karma. None of us spends all our dollars at Karma, but we are trying to encourage people to buy a larger proportion of their groceries. And one way we can do that is to connect with local farmers and bring seasonable produce to our members so they can purchase them in bulk for preservation. Also, to get involved in events at the store, as well as out in the community. Member labor and getting people re-engaged with member labor is important for us. One, to control labor costs, but also to get people in the store, because when people come in to do their member labor, they generally shop as well. So it's just a way of maintaining traffic at the store as well. We've just reopened on Monday after a long time of being closed on Mondays in a bid to increase sales, and that's been successful for us. But we're managing that extra day by bringing in extra member labor for that day. And then we're also getting out in the community, doing postering, tabling at events, and also just bringing people from our neighbors and friends into shop for a trial shop and inspiring them to get re-involved with the co-op. So I guess to sum up is that we encourage people from all over the broader area to come in, even if we're not their only shopping place. And there are opportunities to buy one's bulk and staple products, perhaps on a monthly basis, and then also to supplement it with what's specific in their own neighborhoods as well. So that's just a little snapshot of where we are as a cooperative, and trying to fight the good fight, and it remains a battle, and in this most highly competitive of industries. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. That must have been quite the event with both Gabriel Aladua and Chris Ramsrup. I've heard them both individually, and they're both high energy. So that must have been a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, and Jen Fenning's no shrinking violet either.
That's true.
She can hold her own as well. So yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. So last and certainly not least, we have Susanna Redekop, who is a co-founder of Freedom Dreams Co-op Education and a program manager at the Canadian Community Economic Development Network. She has spent the last 13 years co-founding, developing, and supporting food co-ops and farm co-ops throughout Ontario with the West End Food Co-op, Local Food and Farm Co-ops Network, and other cooperative initiatives. So take it away, Susanna.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Wade, and thanks to Food Secure Canada for hosting me. Just wanted to mention that, yes, while today I will be talking on behalf of Freedom Dreams Co-op Education, because I have been part of launching food and farm co-ops across the province of Ontario for over a decade. Feel free to ask any questions about that as well too in the Q&A part. So Freedom Dreams provides services and workshops that share knowledge about cooperatives and the solidarity economy from a Black, Indigenous, and person of color perspective. We all started in Toronto in 2021, and now we're national. Since I myself am still here in Toronto, my colleagues, Christine is in Vancouver and Aileen in Yellowknife. We were co-op developers who had not seen ourselves, our stories, or experiences reflected in the Canadian co-op sector. So we created what we needed. Next, please. So a little bit about me and my journey. I'm the mother of 3 children, and I always like to start with that because that grounds me in my relationships. Now you know something of value about me outside of just where I work. I live in a housing co-op in Parkdale, in the west end of Toronto, which is a neighborhood with a history of community-based action. It's historically a low-income area with a high influx of immigrants and newcomers. Parkdale has a history of having been part of launching a number of local activist, community-based alternative economy initiatives over decades. And I've been lucky to be part of a few of them, including the Parkdale People's Economy, the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust, which is Toronto's first land trust. And now there's 9 in the GTA. And shout out again to Anika in the audience there with Little Jamaica Land Trust, as well as the West End Food Co-op in Parkdale. Many of these initiatives are or have been based around food security on a localized level. And so here I just have a small sampling of how cooperatives and cooperative values have deep historical roots in racialized communities all over the globe. We actually have a whole free webinar series we did in 2021 called Transformation on Our Own Terms about BIPOC histories of existence, resistance, and thriving despite the erasure of our stories from the founding of cooperatives and forms of cooperation. I can put the link in chat later after my presentation if desired. So we've already been through a little bit of what are co-ops, thanks to John and Paul's presentations as well. Thank you. So we know co-ops form when members of a community come together to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations. An example here is actually the first community land trust in the States, which was founded in the 1960s and was also a farming co-op. New Communities, Inc. formed as a way to secure access to farmland, provide affordable and secure housing, foster greater economic and political independence, as well as food security and food sovereignty for Black American farmers. Cooperation and co-op values are so embedded in such a rich diversity of racialized cultures that these are inseparable from the rest of life. It's mutual aid. It's helping out your elderly neighbor with their yard work. It's creating a meal train to organize meal drop-offs with a family with a new baby, for example. It's just what you do. Cross-culturally, next slide, please. Black and Indigenous solidarity is important to further both causes. Our liberation is inextricably linked. In my master's research, I'd found striking similarities between First Nations interviewees and those of the African diaspora. The Ojibwe words that mean mutual aid or helping others, and the Igbo words from Nigerian culture that mean no person left behind. These apply not only to family and friends, but to strangers, to everyone in society. Naturally, these values also move into the business world too, but they don't have to be stripped of their cultural context. However, most of the formalized Canadian co-op sector, this isn't for necessarily everyone. Some choose to operate outside of incorporating as a co-op due to the bureaucratic red tape or taking too much volunteer time, but not everybody has available, and unpaid labor to be able to develop the co-op, language barriers, or simply because sometimes the sector doesn't quite understand the cultural context of a wider diversity of cooperative businesses. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for racialized communities and for food sovereignty? These systems are all interconnected. Bringing elements of cooperative traditions from other cultures comes naturally since these are so embedded in life, but also business. Co-ops are a means for self-governance and autonomy outside of systems created for our oppression. And food sovereignty includes control over the means of production, distribution, access of quality, culturally appropriate food for the people, by the people, which is inextricably linked to land back. This also includes dreaming beyond the limits of what we have in front of us and how we also get to new places and innovative ideas. So let's dream beyond the confines of our current settler colonial capitalist state that enables this corporate greedflation that we're talking about. Next slide, please. So I know you've had previous presentations, I think in the first session, the session before ours, about greedflation, with statistics about Northern and Indigenous food insecurity and food inflation issues. So I'm not going to dwell on some of these things, but just to keep this as part of the slide deck so you can refer to it later. But stats like these demonstrate that racialized families, particularly Black and Indigenous households, face significantly higher barriers to food security. Also experience price discrimination as well. There was a 2017 Black Creek Food Justice study, Black Creek Food Justice Network study that demonstrated not only do their residents have fewer food access options than many Toronto communities, but also experience not only higher policing, but pay 7% higher food prices than anywhere else in the GTA. This makes no sense. All that to say is that we need change, and it's going to be up to us to push for that. Next slide, please. So for centuries, women in the global South and around the world have mobilized scarce resources in low-income communities. Studies show there's fewer mainstream commercial banks in low-income racialized communities in Canada, and often experiences of racism in mainstream financial institutions lead people of color to rely on alternative banking systems. ROSCAs meet this need. So ROSCA stands for Rotating Savings and Credit Associations. These are informal savings collectives where members contribute a set amount of money to a common fund on a regular basis. And they take turns in collecting part or all of that pool to spend on whatever they may need. Sometimes it's something smaller like groceries or things for the household. I've also talked to folks who have used this to pay off their student loans, to have a down payment on a house. There's no interest, there's no fees, it's just your own money. So as a example for, if we just say, if we have 10 women in a circle and each of us has $100 to put in, that $100, it goes around. So each time, each month, that person whose turn it is will get that $1,000. That's their own money. That's what they put in. There's no interest on top of that banks, want to charge you. But it just comes in a larger amount so that you can use it for, those more important or larger purchases. ROSCAs are known by their cultural names where they operate mostly by racialized women or banker ladies. From Isusu in Ghana, Jamaica, to Parna in Trinidad, from chit funds in India, or tandas in Latin America, from Pakistan, China, Korea, Mexico, Sri Lanka, Ecuador, Japan, just to name a few. There's so many different places and different, words and terms for this type of system. So also to say, if you or someone participates in one of these, let us know in the chat. I'm always so excited because I feel like sometimes or often when I do these kinds of talks, I've learned so much more about, what might also be out there. I'd also take this minute, just go back for a sec, to credit Dr. Carolyn Chinez-Hussein with her immense research in this area. While these systems are cooperative, they don't follow the structure of an incorporated business here in Canada. That's on purpose. Therefore, we use terms like solidarity economy instead to encompass a wider range of activities that build a world to center around people and planet rather than maximizing private profit and endless growth. Thanks. Next slide, please. Here's a couple of examples of co-ops and solidarity economy relating to food sovereignty. This group here is a Black Women Professional Co-op, who are cooperative of women who raise the seed capital for their various food-based businesses and this cooperative on a ROSCA model in the GTA. Among them, they have farmers, food producers, financial advisors, environmental nonprofit leaders, and they collectively share these services. They just launched their membership recently, but I've been working with them for 3 years. And I recall when a grant officer from a grant we applied for took a lot of convincing that this ROSCA model works. I remember them asking, how can you trust you'll get your money back from each other? We know because it's what we've always done. From our mothers, our aunties, or grandmothers, it's just what you do. I'm moving from surviving to thriving. Trista Pelopisconius runs Your Way Together. This is a program through Cooperatives First in Western Canada. They support Indigenous-led co-ops and cooperative initiatives. Cooperatives First is also like an educational arm of Federated Cooperatives Federated that John mentioned before. These cultural and language co-ops that Trista is helping to establish preserve First Nations culture, for example, for future generations. That's one of the ones that they included. Also, another one is a collective of BC First Nations owned fisheries that decided to create a co-op together and pool their resources. Another is a fly-in community in the Yukon, so that means no road access, only fly-in, that decided to collectively own their grocery store, and much more. Over her time working with so many First Nations communities, Trista recognized the need to switch her mindset from seeing deficiencies to seeing the strengths that these vibrant communities have. Enhancing those strengths through cultural ways of cooperation has been the way going forward. The goal is to support each group in what their own goals are, not necessarily going in with presupposed ideas of what this may mean for them. Often in creating new systems, we're breaking new ground. So there was a Haida women-led renewable energy co-op I've been connecting with, and they're in the process of incorporating Haida traditional decision-making through potlatch into their cooperative bylaws. If you're not familiar with potlatch, everybody comes with something, and those who don't have enough take more. Those who have more that they can give take less. Everybody leaves with something, and the person who's the wealthiest is the one who leaves with nothing. That's because they've given everything that they have away, and that opens up that reciprocity, those pathways for building those relationships later. So these systems are built on that trust and reciprocity. Thank you. A great example of cooperative initiatives toward food sovereignty is the Milky Way Garden in Parkdale. This group of mostly Tibetan elders, many of whom are farmers back in Nepal, have been growing food nearly for 2 decades, and in an area just off an alleyway owned by private landowners. When they were ready to sell, the neighborhood land trust stepped in and purchased it with a lot of community support, private donations, and grants. And now they preserve the Milky Way Garden as a shared agriculture space for Parkdale, and provide a long-term lease to Greenest City, who is the operating programmer on the site. Next slide, please. So all that to say, there are many ways in which community food networks operate outside of capitalism, where money is less valuable than relationships. Barter and trade networks exist all over. So farmers markets that we're all familiar with. At the end of a market, you'll see producers and farmers trading product with each other because they don't want to take it home. They want to lessen their food waste, and they'd rather trade for something else. In Northern Ontario reserve communities, because of racist governmental policies such as the Indian Act, restrict communities to very few options of overpriced, poor quality food transported from the South through such things as northern stores. The other alternative is the option of growing, trading, or sharing their own culturally appropriate food. So community freezers for country meats are a community-based way to share the wealth on reserve. When someone hunts, they may take what they need for their family and leave the rest in a community freezer, so others may take what they need. They also know that when they need it, they'll also be there for them too. And community gardens, again, full of sharing networks and sites of knowledge sharing, seed sharing, skill building, as well as food security and food sovereignty. And then my last point here is just to let's keep in mind that Canada does produce enough food to feed us all. It's a system that's broken, and corporations are the ones who are profiting most. Food waste happens in every stage, from farm to producer to retail and household. Second Harvest has a 2019 study that shows that 58% of all food produced in Canada goes to waste. That's more than half. That's over 11 million tons. well, nearly $50 billion. And that was 2019 stats. So imagine now post-COVID. So while banks are seeing higher, need ever since COVID, oh, sorry, I'm gonna skip that part. All this to say that, yeah, when we had our food co-op, West End Food Co-op, we had a community kitchen that used quality grocery that would have gone to waste otherwise and turned into prepared meals. Organizations like Second Harvest, Feed It Forward in Toronto, Feed Ontario are great local initiatives that do food rescue well. But government policy could make it easier to connect those dots. So support your local initiatives, get involved and find out what's happening close to you. And when you shop, be mindful to shop locally, vote with your dollar, and support small business and cooperatives where possible. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Susanna. And you ended it on the note of government policy, which brings us to the first question of our Q&A session. So this is for everybody, and feel free to chime in if you have a response right away. But the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, François-Philippe Champagne, is, with no pun intended, shopping for another large grocery chain, and he's looking to foreign grocers to enter the market to bolster competition in this country. So the question is, how can we position co-ops as a viable option at this critical juncture when the government is thinking about grocery competition? And is there anybody who's taking the lead in advocating for this? And as a subsidiary question to that, what do solidarity grocery stores and co-ops need from the government in order to grow and flourish?
I'm happy to just step in to share my perspective on that question. I think, the first step in imagining the co-op alternative is to really recognize them as a distinct alternative. And it sounds like it goes without saying, but when you read the Competition Bureau's report last year, the one titled Canada Needs More Grocery Competition, this was a huge development in Canadian, competition law, as well as enforcement, as well as expanding awareness of the possibility of doing something different with grocery. And so I commend the report and commend some of the actions that have been taken. But I was saddened when I read that report to not see cooperatives mentioned once. So there is no mention in that entire report of co-ops. So presumably co-ops are being combined with what's referenced in that report as independent grocers. However, the Jim Pattison Group, which is one of the 3 largest grocers in Western Canada, is also noted as an independent grocer. And so, food co-ops and companies like the Jim Pattison Group are 2 very distinct entities and organisms within the co-op sector, or within the grocery sector, I should say. So I think the first step is to really recognize co-ops as a distinct alternative. And this has been one of the greatest challenges for co-ops. The Canadian Centre for Cooperatives at the University of Saskatchewan puts out a report every year. And each year, one of those needs that co-ops across the country are recognizing and communicating is that they need to be able to figure out how to communicate what makes them different. Co-op awareness is one of the greatest challenges among co-ops. And so I think before we start talking about what can be done, we need to recognize co-ops as a distinct alternative and understand what they are.
Yes, if I can jump in as well too, I would totally agree with you there, John. There was some specific movement this year in the 2024 national budget with housing co-ops, and that took a long time to be able to get that happening. So I think that if we want to be able to see there being specific support from the government to support food co-ops and farm co-ops and that kind of within the food industry, the food sector, I think it's going to take a lot of us to be able to make that noise. But seeing that being listed means that there are co-ops on their mind. I think right up there with how dire housing is right now, food is absolutely there as well too, and just getting worse. I did notice that with the Competition Bureau report, it does mention things like encouraging independent and international players to set up shop. That confused me. I was like, okay, like, yes, exactly what you're talking about. Why are we on the same level? And also, like, do we want more Costco's and Walmarts taking away from local business? Like, I didn't really understand what that was trying to say in there. So all that to say, I think that we need to do some more education about what cooperatives are and how this issue of food security and food sovereignty, these pieces are really important. And food sovereignty includes how you are getting your food, who is producing it, all along that value chain. That's really important. And so democratizing that value chain is all about what co-ops are.
And if I could just piggyback on that, that's great points, Susanna. And where cooperatives have a hard time competing is with that consolidated supply chain. And so what would help cooperatives is if there were more of a regional hub for food processing, food distribution, run on a cooperative basis, serving the cooperative industry. And that would at least kind of level the playing field somewhat with those large grocery operators. So some kind of cooperative efforts up the supply chain to consolidate the local produce and then add value to it.
We'll just
Great,
add that.
thank you.
Oh,
sorry, go ahead, John.
Yeah, just a quick add to that. I mean, one of the, I think I don't want to so much say failures of that report, but it certainly narrowed in on a very specific piece within the food supply chain, which is the retailing side of it. And so, Paul, what you were speaking to is how important that distribution piece is to this whole holistic picture of the system. And as many of you probably do know, is that a lot of the distribution in Canada is also stewarded and controlled by the large grocers. So here in Western Canada, most of the independent grocers receive their food from the Jim Pattison Group. And that's similar in the East, where Sobeys is one of the primary distributors to independent grocers. And so that level of overlap and vertical integration is absolutely part of the conversation and needs to be part of the conversation, because it's also part of the conversation in co-ops that in Western Canada, one of the top 5 distributors is a co-op, is Federated Co-op, which is owned by independent cooperative stores across Western Canada and serves the Arctic co-ops as well. So that's a big part of the piece that's also missing from this and from that report.
Thank you. Yeah, and it was just noted in the chat that we put out an op-ed in response to that those parliamentary hearings in that report. Citing a lot of the things that were said already. The next question, we don't have a ton of time, but I'm just going to ask one question to Beccah. There was some interest in knowing how the Solidarity grocery store gets funded. How is it subsidized, and what does startup funding look like for that?
Yeah, sure. So the market and the grocery store are run by one legal entity, which is a nonprofit organization. It's, as I mentioned, it's not a charitable organization. So there's a lot of funding that we're not eligible for, like a lot of private foundation funding. Since entity is not a legal registered charity, we're not eligible for. So we get a limited, we sometimes do requests for funding from our local credit union is a good funder, pretty reliable funder. They'll give us a small amount, and occasionally there'll be social economy. Quebec is really has invested in local social economy projects to a greater degree, I think, than in other provinces. I may be wrong, but that's my impression. So there are a couple great funds at both the municipal and the provincial level for if you want to scale up or do some things differently, and also from the MAPAC, which is provincial as well. So the Minister of Agriculture occasionally will encourage social economy projects to have more local food. So there's a couple little sources of funding that we're able to apply for here and there. But at the end of the day, both projects have to be rentable. And as we say in French, they have to make ends meet. They have to be functional and financially viable. And I actually really appreciate the distinction between the two sides of our organization, because it really makes clear the difference between these social programs that can be 100% subsidized and can accept donations and all the rest, and are really 100% focused on the social mission, and these two social economy projects, which are distinct financially and legally, and really have to think about their bottom line while also keeping their nonprofit missions in mind. So that distinction I find very helpful for clarity of purpose. Yeah. Hope that answers the question.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So we had less time for Q&A than we thought, but I invite any of you who did not get an answer to your question to reach out to the panelists directly. And then also for those who are wanting more information, there's some questions about the information on the presentations. This is all recorded and will be available on our website and YouTube in the coming week or two. So again, thanks. I'm going to close this out and thank you all for joining us. Please follow us on our social media, and you can subscribe to our newsletter. There should be a link in the chat. Just some updates on our end. We are in the midst of planning for an in-person convening in Montreal in November on food affordability and justice. We'll be announcing more details in the coming weeks, so please stay tuned. Yeah, you can always subscribe to our newsletter to keep informed on future conversations on advancing just, healthy, and sustainable food systems. You can click on the Get Involved link on our website or click the link in the chat. So again, thank you again for all the panelists who presented today and all of the attendees who came. And feel free to reach out to either us or the panelists if you want further information. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, merci.